Welcome back to the fine print. I got Grayson Glosser here again for another chunk from X-Tract Vermont in Saint Albans. And I wanted to sort of pick up where you left off there, where you were talking about decarboxylation. And I was hoping maybe you could explain a little bit about what that is, because I wasn't good at chemistry.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I sucked at that. That was my worst science.
You are. So decarboxylation, it's chemically speaking, it's a pretty simple process. Basically, if you look at the structure of what THC versus THCA looks like, you'll hear people kind of say that a lot, and a lot of people don't actually kind of know what that means. So the difference between the two is that the A is basically shorthand for acid. There's on pretty much all cannabinoids, when they're in the plant, they have a carboxylic acid group attached to, the ring on the structure. And that's actually really important, because if you were to consume THCA, if you were to eat it, or if you were to somehow inhale it, and I'll get to why that's actually kind of hard to do, you wouldn't actually feel a psychoactive effect. And the main reason for that is it just inhibits the binding to any endocannabinoid receptor. So that acid, if you want your
sort
cannabis,
of like buprenorphine or something, where it like doesn't allow opiates to bind to those receptors.
Kind of. It's more so that the molecule itself just doesn't bind.
Okay.
And that's kind of what gives you the psychoactive effect. So what you do is you will decarboxylate it. And the reaction for decarboxylating it is actually rather simple. Some decarboxylation reactions, if you were to do them on other molecules, you need a catalyst or something. But because of the specific properties of cannabinoids, it actually will just happen if you heat it to about 80 to 100 Celsius for 1 to 3 hours. And what that will do is it will convert the THCA by decarboxylating it into THC. So basically that will just get, and then THC has the psychoactive effect. It binds to the receptor. It's what we all know and love. And that's kind of the long and short of why you do that. So if you've ever I know a lot of people have made canna butter at home before, and you'll know that before you put it in, if you were to put it, let's say, in a pot, and you were to infuse that oil, you need to put it in the oven first. I don't know what people do for that. I know people will set their ovens to maybe like 300 for 2 hours or something.
Allegedly, yeah.
I don't know if that's accurate.
No, yeah.
I have different parameters, and I do it in the oil form. But that's kind of that's why that's important to do, because otherwise nothing's gonna happen, because you don't have the active form of the compound.
Right. So like if you just dumped a bunch of flour into a boiling pot, like butter.
Then that wouldn't work. And then now when you smoke it, the thing is you're burning it, you're combusting it, and you're heating it to a very high temperature. Or when you're taking a dab or something, you're at a really high temperature, so that reaction happens all at once, and then you inhale it and you have the THC in your lungs. It's been decarboxylated. And that's why it's kind of hard to inhale THCA. You're like, how would you do that?
Yeah, you said the THCA will crystallize into those diamond type extracts or whatever.
Yeah, and so a lot of butane extracts specifically are not decarboxylated. And THCA likes to crystallize a lot. And you will get that kind of grainy, or you can make something like diamonds. Those are really big stones that are, maybe like they can range on the size of maybe grains to, you can get big faceted stones. There's some real artists who know how to do that kind of stuff. But it also gives it that, if you have kind of like the wet, grainy sand look on an extract, that's what gives it that consistency. But you can also because that's a crystalline mode, you can also have an amorphous mode. So if you've ever heard of shatter before, shatter is just the amorphous crystalline structure. So, if you heat it to its glass transition, it will actually be kind of like a malleable, foldable.
So it's like a phase change.
Exactly. Except, yeah. Now, and glass transitions are kind of interesting because if you heat it above that temperature, it'll be pliable and flexible.
Yeah,
but if you cool it down, it'll break.
Glass is a magical substance that I don't fully understand.
Yeah, that's kind of what happens with it. And it depends on the terpenes and the other, if you have waxes or partial decarboxylation, it might affect that glass transition temperature. It might affect how it crystallizes. But a lot of those different extracts you see, you're like, nah, man, you got to do like this one, or, oh, this one hits better. There's really not a blanket term that does that, because there's so much variability that's possible.
I've tried so many different, I like them all kind of.
Yeah, it's like, what tastes good, what.
That's really what it comes down to. Does it taste good? Like? Does it smell good? And does it work?
The other interesting one that a lot of people try and gauge quality on, and sometimes you can, is color. A lot of times if you're like, oh, like the dark looking extract, it's like, oh, that one's not as good, like get the light stuff. And the thing is, a little pigment goes a long way. So you could have maybe a couple parts per million or something, or maybe a 0.5% chlorophyll. That is going to be very, very, very green. There's other pigment classes like carotenoids, xanthophylls, anthocyanins. Those are kind of like orangey red, yellow, and then blue, purple, pink, respectively. And a lot of those pigments have different colors depending on their pH, especially anthocyanins. Like they'll be blue if they're in an alkaline environment, but pink in an acidic one. Which is, yeah, it's pretty cool. But again, they still absorb a lot of light and they give it a lot of color. So if you even have a small amount of that in there, it's gonna be actually really dark. And it's not always, sometimes you might be able to taste it, and in that case it's like, yeah, this isn't as good because of that. But it's not always the case.
I've never look, I'm a customer and I have been my whole life, and I don't put any stock in that whatsoever.
Yeah.
Although really, sometimes I did have one vape card that didn't flow properly, and I noticed it was super dark, and I did take a note of that. Although I don't really, not to say there's any causal link.
No, it's possible. I would say, with light colored extracts, you're less likely to have impurities. No, and I would say there are a lot of transparent impurities that are present, but a lot of, the ones that will clog your vape cart are more likely to be colored a little bit, or they might be a little darker.
What kind of impurities would cause a vape cart to clog up?
So the way I kind of break it down, if you were to look at all of the compounds that are present, and I'm going to real broad strokes to keep it simple, but you start with the terpenes, cannabinoids, flavonoids. That's the good stuff. You kind of want that.
Do they vaporize at different temperatures?
They do, but as long as it's homogeneous, they'll all vaporize at the same time.
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
But then you kind of start stepping down, and you have lipids, things like triglycerides, lecithins, free fatty acids. Those still vaporize. Like there's actually a big impurity in a lot of vape carts that's also transparent, is free fatty acids, and that's okay. It just kind of happens like that. Maybe it might contribute some harshness to it. You might feel it a bit more. So, but not always. Again, it's kind of a hard chemistry.
But don't some people like to feel it a little bit more?
Yeah, I know a lot of people do. So I know I certainly don't want to. It's a matter of taste. But then you start to really get into the less pleasurable and things, impurities that are going to start clogging. So you'll get into things like instead of lipids, or you'll have non-saponifiable liquids. So things that aren't triglycerides, just kind of wax that really it burns and it doesn't really vaporize that much. Or you get If you, for some reason there's like sugar, if there's proteins, those will definitely burn and clog. Wax is usually the biggest one for most types of compounds, because you really shouldn't be extracting sugars or proteins or fiber.
Why would there be sugars in a vape cart?
Because somebody did a bad job purifying. For the most part, it happens with inexperience. I've made
Is sugar like a byproduct of a bad extraction?
No. Like sugar in the sense of carbohydrates, it's just present in the plant. It's probably pound for pound the most prevalent. And you'd likely see that with an ethanol extract. You'd be really hard pressed to do that with CO2 or butane. And then you would also have to do a good job. And the thing is, it would probably be ethanol crude that you would have to vape, and a lot of people wouldn't do that. And so they would run it through a still first, and then that's how you would get there. And all these different compounds, is there anything else? I guess the pigments as well. Pigments are another one that they can.
How about the quality of the actual cartridge that you're buying? Does that affect the flow?
That affects it a lot. There's actually this is kind of an interesting thing on the industry for a lot of processors, is there's not really a lot of good hardware for cannabis specifically. A lot of vape carts, all this stuff, it was made for nicotine, and then there really hasn't been any adaptation for it. It's actually too high in terms of temperature. It causes degradation, things that taste bad. But yeah, having just cheap hardware, they can clog easily. This is a good one. If you are filling a vape cart, you need to cap it within 2 minutes. It's not certain that it will clog, but it raises the probability that it will.
Is that just a lab protocol? That's not in like the legislation? Or
no.
Okay,
That's like a good practices thing.
Okay,
because you'll get this kind of wicking action that causes the coil to get kind of pre-wet, and it will kind of just start to ooze in a way that it's not supposed to. So you can get leaks, but more often you'll get clogs.
I have seen it sort of like separate, which was
How did it separate?
I've only seen once. What's that?
How did it separate? Was there like a watery layer on top?
Yeah, I don't know. It turned a different color. It got super dark and like stuck to the wall and just would not go down.
So that is probably not separation. It's actually oxidation. This is something that you see a lot with ethanol extracts. I could speculate why, but I'm not too sure. What's happening, this happens a lot with distillate as well. Specifically this doesn't happen as much with CBD, but it happens more with THC and CBN, where they'll get this red line, this little layer on top of the oil, on the very top. So, a vape cart is 1 gram. I work with kilograms. So this will happen with CBD very, very, at a slower pace, but with THC, it happens faster, where there's this little red line right at the top. And that's actually from oxygen reacting with the THC and forming what's called a quinone. It's just an oxidative byproduct. And they're actually, like I said earlier, they absorb color really, really well. So it's actually not even that much. Because if you steal a container, there's actually not much oxygen, but it's so colored. It's a really vibrant red. And that actually might be what you're seeing. Like sometimes what happens is you'll see, especially with cheap vape carts that use propylene glycol, that will actually separate into 2 layers, and then you'll have like a watery layer.
Where do they make all these vape carts? They got to be made in China, right?
All of them. I don't think there's any US based.
Your mic's cutting out a little bit.
Oh, is it?
It is. Well, that sounds a little better.
Okay. Yeah, they're all. It's all based in China. Unfortunately, there's no United States based vape supplier.
None of them, huh? None of them?
I could not find one. There's only about 2 I think there's only a handful, if not 1 factory in China that makes them. Maybe a handful, but there's there's threads on a couple of forums that I read, and it's like, what's the original cart factory? And there's a bunch of them on there arguing who is the original one. It's like,
Fight it out.
yeah, and yeah, so that's where all of those are from. And you can get higher quality ones. You can get there's certain cart lines where like one's from the same company, they look the same, but the difference is the materials are different qualities. So really, really cheap ones, they'll use lower grade copper, let's say, and that has about 10 times the amount of lead as the higher grade ones. It's a small amount of lead, obviously, but it's still more than is common. And
what I've also heard is that some of the electrical components, the heating elements, will be coated with some sort of C8 DuPont non-stick chemicals.
Oh, cadmium or
C8 PFAS. Some of those.
Okay. Well, that's not good either. Yeah, that's like the batteries and stuff. That's another one.
I know they use them in toaster ovens on the heating elements, and things of that nature.
I don't know about that. I wouldn't be surprised.
Well,
but
Kelly Story owes me $20 now because she bet me I couldn't stump you. I told her I'd split it with you too. So you just won $10, my friend.
Oh, well, that's awfully sweet. Oh, I miss Kelly. She lives so out in the middle of nowhere.
Can I ask you about Delta 8? What do you know about the Delta 8?
So a fair amount. What specifically are you interested in?
Let me tell you, I watched a public meeting from Swanton when they were trying to do the opt-in vote, and this woman quoted as the reason why we shouldn't have retail sales. She said because she saw a reality show called The Seven Little Johnsons, which is a show about little people, and one of them smoked some Delta 8 and went into a psychosis, and he had to go to the hospital, and his dad was very scared, and that is why we should not have retail sales. I didn't want to ask you about politics, but I don't know much about Delta 8 personally. Yeah, I thought that was a strange reason.
Delta 8 THC. So I guess we should say, like, in terms of being clear, so the type of THC that we're used to is called Delta 9 THC, Delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That you could kind of hear where the THC is. Delta 8 tetrahydrocannabinol, it's just an ice. And literally it's just a double bond is moved to a different position. That's why it's a different number, but it's the same name. So I don't know if you want to bust out your chemistry IUPAC handbook for the naming on that, but that's why they call it Delta 8, because it's just that's the name of the isomer, and it has a weaker psychoactive effect on the order of 2 to 10 times weaker than Delta 9. That's kind of the and the reason it's been so popular is because it's derived from hemp. And because of that, it's not subject to the same federal restrictions that Delta 9 THC is subject to. And because of that, it's, it can cross state lines. You can, trade it, sell it on, maybe not sell it online. I'm not sure about that, but it's not subject to marijuana laws, basically. It's subject to the hemp rules. Now, the reason I put air quotes there was because it's a synthetic cannabinoid. It's made basically by acid. It's isomerized from CBD to Delta 8 THC by using acid, using an acid catalyst.
What kind of acid?
Pretty much anyone you can, like citric acid will work. Any acid you can find, and then use your solvent and heat, and that will turn CBD into Delta 8. It'll also turn Delta 9 into Delta 8 and Delta 8 into Delta 9. It's kind of if you were to look at the reaction on the ring, it basically just moves this bond around this in a circle and moves it wherever you want. which kind of brings up a bit of a legal concern, is that a lot of, it's actually very hard to just make pure Delta 8, because, I say we make this, but you're also making Delta 9. And, if you were to use citric acid, you would get roughly a 3-to-1 ratio of Delta 8 to Delta 9 THC. But the federal law is below 0.3% THC by dry mass. So you need a ratio of about, I think 300 to 1 is what that would be. And so there's a lot of, but the fact that it's kind of I guess a loophole, a lot of people are just doing, they're using whatever acid and that's the thing, is that they might be using, a very common one is called p-toluene sulfonic acid, or I guess PTOS is a common one. And I do have a lot of experience as a synthetic chemist, and something that I can tell you is that the money is not in the reaction, it's in the workup and the purification, because that's the hard part. It's like you did this reaction and you made a bunch of stuff. You didn't just make one thing. That's kind of how chemistry works. And now you have to separate the impurities from your target compound.
Yeah. And what kind of waste stream does that produce? Is it, or if any?
Yeah, it's going to generate a hazardous waste stream. It can be taken care of safely. Like p-toluene sulfonic acid is it is a hazardous chemical, but it can be, I think, incinerated under special conditions. Maybe not.
We should double check that one.
It's an organic analog of sulfuric acid is kind of the way I say that, which that's a little more hazardous. But yeah, there's a lot of, and that's kind of the issue. I don't have, like, I'd say my opinion on this, and I feel qualified to give my opinion, is that if you're, if you're doing a good job purifying your Delta 8, I don't see any issue with it. In terms of the loophole, that I think this might have been, I think it was the 15th court in California, but it might have been some other federal court. I don't remember. They ruled that Delta 8 is actually legal by the hemp rules. So federally, I think it was, I don't know, but I'm not sure about that.
What about these other, like these K2 and the spice and these other like synthetic?
Yeah, K2, that's a throwback. K2 and spice are older synthetic cannabinoids, but the newer ones are things like HHC, hexahydrocannabinol. So that's one of them.
Sorry, I'm old.
Delta 10. There's a lot of these new ones, and it's kind of the same thing. In terms of just, it's kind of a tricky situation, because most cannabinoids are pretty non-toxic. It's not like, I don't like, for me, the alcohol and cannabis, like, oh, this one's legal and this one's not. Like, that is kind of a tired thing at this point for me. Although I certainly understand it and agree with it.
It's fucking old for me too, buddy.
I know, right? I bet. But the they haven't been clinically tested, and that's kind of the difficult thing. I'd say Delta 9 there is more clinical research that certainly needs to be done. The federal government needs to obviously make it legal to do clinical research.
Wink, wink.
They
watch my show.
Yeah. In terms of the other isomers, they just haven't really been tested, and they're not really like Delta 8 is minimally present, but HHC, a lot of these other ones, they're not. And while they could be safe, they may not be, and that's why it's kind of a hard thing to say. And there's a lot of people in the hemp industry who are just like, yeah, go for it, make kilograms of it and sell it. It's like, okay.
No, let me ask you this, because I don't know, I've been told that that cannabis plants are very good at concentrating certain things, specifically heavy metals.
Yeah.
So that when you are extracting, and I was looking at the state's guidance on testing for solvents and pesticides and heavy metals. I wanted to ask you what you know about that, but also like if you guys are going to be liable for that. Like when you take a product, does it have to be tested before it gets to you? Or are you guys responsible for testing it? And also,
Yes.
yeah. Sorry,
Sorry,
go
I didn't
ahead.
mean to cut you off, but yeah, so the testing that's going to be required is beforehand. And, so if you're going to test flower, let's say, you need to have pesticides, potency, and heavy metal testing done. And then if you're going to do extraction, you need to have, and then I think also with the flower, you need maybe a microbial one, I'm not sure, or a mycotoxin, which is like a mold, or
I was told they're not doing the
thing.
mycotoxin testing in Vermont.
Yeah, it's kind of unnecessary. If you don't see mold, it's not moldy. That's kind of the kicker. If you're making a concentrate, you need to test, potency, heavy metals, pesticides and herbicides, residual solvents, and I can never remember it. There's a fifth one. I forget what it is off the top of my head. I think it might have been the mycotoxins one, but if that got struck, that's interesting.
I don't remember a fifth one. I thought you had them all there. I thought, but
I might. It's hard to remember all of them off the top of my head. But yeah, cannabis actually does bioaccumulate heavy metals, and metals in general. A lot of plants do. It depends. What is it? Cannabis likes to accumulate manganese, especially when the soil's acidic. I know that is a common one.
like cadmium.
But yeah, cadmium, arsenic, lead, mercury, those are very common. It's not really that big of an issue. It is, those compounds are just naturally present in soil.
But let me ask you this. So in this guide from the state, they issued actionable limits for flour, which all had various numbers, and then for concentrates. But it seemed like the way they scaled it, it wasn't just like, okay, if you could have 1 parts per million for cadmium and then 10 parts per million in the concentrate. It wasn't scaled evenly. Do you know why they would scale some of these?
So the concentrate one, the concentrate threshold was higher?
Yeah, like for cadmium, I believe it was like 2 parts per million, and then you could have 7.5. So it was scaled like 3.5.
So this has to do with, it has to do with dose. So if you're going to smoke flower, if let's say in a joint, you might smoke a whole joint. You might have a gram and, to yourself. So you have to look at the amount, in terms of, okay, we have 1 gram and it's 4 parts per billion or parts per million. In that case, we're getting, 4 micrograms. Whereas in a concentrate, if you're going to take a 1 gram dab, you're probably not going to have the whole thing. You're probably going to just.
I'm not taking a 1 gram dab. I'd probably die.
No, you're probably not. So, you can set that threshold a lot higher, and that is, you're not going to run into issues with that because, the concentration matters, but so does the dose. Now, I will say heavy metals aren't usually an issue unless you've built on an orchard or parking lot. If that's where your farm used to be, then you're not really in any trouble for that. It happens sometimes, and there's actually pretty easy methods to get around it.
An orchard, is that from the arsenic from the apples?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Oh, great point.
I'm not sure though. I don't know anything about apples.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Okay.
But with mercury, it happens. It makes its way into the soil, but they aren't particularly soluble they're soluble in water, and I guess that would be enough to bring it with it, at least sparingly so. Especially when you get, for mercury, it's I think 50 parts per billion is the actionable limit for mercury. But there's also methods to remediate it.
Which if you had to guess, what would you say would be the most profitable extract to make based on the time that it takes? And what would you say is the best one in terms of people just like it the most? We got about 8 minutes here. I was hoping we could just mellow for a
Yeah,
minute and speculate a little bit and see
no,
what
that's
you
a good
think
question.
see what you think are going to be some of the best products.
In terms of profitable, I don't know. I really couldn't tell you off the, because you can look at the, it's also not something I really go for, because I don't know, try to make good stuff. And a lot of times that's at the cost of price. But a lot of times it also has to do with the input material. If you're probably, I don't know, it kind of really depends on where you set your prices as well, and what people value, because hash rosin or something, that's probably the highest dollar per gram that you could charge somebody, but a lot of waste factor goes into that. There's a lot of loss and yield stuff that goes into that. And if it's like, oh, it's twice as much, but you actually have to use twice as much flour, and it's a more labor intensive process. So that's kind of what happens with that. And then so in terms of concentrates, I guess if we're talking just from an operational perspective, ethanol is probably the cheaper one, just because you don't need as bulky of equipment to handle it. And you can do bigger batches. You don't need to do small ones, but because of that, it's cheaper. So it's kind of a balance. The one that people will like the most for concentrates, I've been getting a lot of requests for shatter. I know that's a really popular one. And it's, distillate is a very, that's a very popular one in the industry, just because it's used for edibles and
Yeah, right.
has a neutral
You can
flavor.
spray that shit on whatever you want, right?
Yeah, that's a fun one. Yeah, I think I'd say the stuff that people like the most, a lot of people like the solventless stuff. I love solventless stuff. Or
the ice water hash is really nice.
It's really good. I've gotten into making it too, and I'm trying to. I've gotten humbled on that a couple of times making it, because it's like, oh, a 3% yield, that's poor. You should be expecting closer to 10 or 15, but
well, you got some trial and error.
Yeah, getting the right kind of agitation, not that kind of ice.
Yeah.
Not. I did a batch where I'm like, it was an ice maker that's in the facility, but it was more of the flaked kind of ice, and it wasn't nearly as rough of an agitation, so not much came off of it. It was very good, but it very low yielding. So, but I think that might be something that a lot of people might like, is the rosin ice water hash derived stuff.
Grayson, we got 5 minutes left here, man. I like to usually just open it up for the guests at the end and let them just speak on whatever they might want to speak on. If you got any final notes here, I'm going to leave it to you.
I don't know. What kind of questions do people typically ask?
We could just wrap it up too. I've been asking people about the legislation at the end, but you said you don't like talking politics. And
yeah, I mean, in terms of, I don't know, what have you been talking about?
In terms of the THC caps.
Oh yeah, I guess that one's actually pretty pertinent to me. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a frustrating one, obviously, because it's like, oh, like the THC caps, it's like, I think I liken the analogy to low percentage beer. It's like, what percentage beer can you not get drunk off of? It's like 1 or 2% beers. It's like, what would the analogy for that be for cannabis? And that's the hemp rules. That's 0.3%.
Right.
So it's I do understand why it's there. I understand people want to, be cautious about this stuff, but I think where, the information it's based on, it might be misguided. But I think that might get overturned. It could be very easily overturned. So We'll see.
I hope you're right about that.
Yeah, because the issue with that is that is like if you want the effect of a 90% concentrate from a 60% one, take a second hit, second smaller one, and you're at the same level.
I think the concern was also that people would then have to be forced to water down their products with various different things.
That is another concern. Now, the way I would do this is I would actually water it down with CBD, CBG, other natural cannabinoids. Other people may not do this, and that is a point of concern, because with the vape scares and stuff like that, although I think vape cartridges are allowed to have over that.
I got this tall truck cart. I believe I was given clearance to.
Are those good?
Cherry pie.
Sounds really good.
Yeah, it's delicious. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here, but man, tastes amazing.
Nice. Yeah, with it's people could put stuff in it, and we could have another vape scare again. And because it doesn't just apply to the cartridges, it applies to all concentrates. And if people are going to be buying these to dab them, it's like, well, what's that other 40%? If you're mandating that, the purity has to go down, that's why I think it's misguided. I understand that it comes from a place of concern of, you don't want people to have higher rates of adverse incidents, but
yeah, but also then you can use less when it's stronger. It's like, okay, now I don't have to smoke a whole joint.
We're coming out of an era of prohibition where you're being told, you can't do this because it's bad for you. And, I think that it just goes against the spirit of what's coming in the legislature.
Mountain Dew is bad for you.
Say again?
Mountain Dew is bad for you.
Yeah. And, that's neither here nor there. Well,
yeah, sorry.
But that it comes with education. We're just going to need to be like, hey, and perhaps that might need to be me being like, look, I don't want to put impurities in these concentrates, but you're making me. And it's unfortunate. I don't want to do that. I'd like to make the cleanest stuff I possibly can, and it's unfortunate if it was mandated that you couldn't do that. So
that's perfect. We're going to get cut off here in 60 seconds, but that's a great note to leave on. Grayson Glosser, X-Tract Vermont. Thank you so much for joining me. I wish you guys the best of luck over there.
Thank you, Caleb. Take care of them.
Yeah, you as well.
Sometime.
All right.